Ambassador, good to see you.
Good morning. Glad to be with you.
Have you spoken to anybody in Trump's circle about his cabinet selections? Can you talk to us about what the priorities are and how you see the cabinet coming together?
Well, not really. I don't think it's appropriate to discuss it in public, and so I've tried to avoid that. I'm imperfect, I suppose, in that regard, but that's the view I take of it.
Well, you know that the reason I'm asking, Ambassador, is Rudy Giuliani actually addressed the possibility of your place in a Trump cabinet just yesterday. Watch this.
John would be a very good choice.
Is there anybody better?
Maybe me, I don't know.
Well, that was pretty funny.
That was hilarious.
Would you accept a cabinet position, Ambassador?
Look, I'm not going to talk about it. The president-elect will make his decisions in God's good time, and then we'll all move on from there.
All right, let's talk about his international trip. His final international trip. He's traveling to Greece today, kicking off this 7-day farewell trip through Europe. What do you think he needs to say? What is he planning to tell foreign leaders from your perspective? He's already said that Trump understands the importance of NATO, and he's trying to reassure world leaders. Is that the way you see it?
Well, if you look at Trump's speeches during the campaign, he's said several times his objective is to strengthen NATO. Now, we can talk about some of his comments like European NATO members not living up to their own commitment to spend 2% of their gross national product on defense, which is a point made repeatedly by the entire American foreign policy establishment. It was only noteworthy when he said it rather than what they say. I would be, honestly, a little worried about having the outgoing president describing what the new president's policy is going to be. I think it's almost inevitable that it can happen, but I think that European leaders would be best advised to talk to the president-elect directly and have their opening conversation. Obviously, more will follow.
That's a very good point.
Yeah. But, Ambassador, it's Dagan McDowell. Donald Trump has, you know, exhibited some warmth toward Vladimir Putin. That's something else, at least during the campaign, that has worried those in Europe.
Well, what I heard Trump say during the campaign was that he admired Putin's strength as a leader. And I think it's clear Putin has taken a very weak hand in terms of his domestic economy, but played a very strong hand in international affairs because he has faced weak leadership from Washington. I didn't take that to mean that he agreed with Putin's substantive policies, especially where they're in conflict with the United States, as in the case of Russia's close relations with nuclear aspiring power Iran.
Mm-hmm. Ambassador, what does a good relationship with Russia actually look like? There's so much talk about whether we can work with Putin or not work with Putin, but what would, in your view, what would be good? What would be helpful here for Trump to pursue?
Well, I think international relations are largely determined by the clash or the confluence of national interest. And in those areas where Putin's prepared to work with us against Islamic terrorism, I think that's a possibility. But if he thinks flying air cover for Iran's nuclear weapons program and the Security Council protecting North Korea's nuclear weapons program, those are fundamentally contrary to American interest. I think the reality is that in places like the Kremlin and Beijing, that it's better to have a strong American leader because it actually, even if there are broad areas of disagreement, it enhances the possibility for cooperation in other areas. If leaders in Russia and China don't respect the American president, you're not going to get much cooperation at all. Why is it in their interest to cooperate with a weak person when they can take what they want?
Yeah, I think you make a great point. By the way, we're looking at pictures right now of President Obama and his team arriving in Athens, Greece. It is about 1:30 in the afternoon in Greece right now, and he is just arriving. We'll continue to show you these pictures while we continue our conversation with Ambassador Bolton. And Ambassador, you bring up Iran. You have an op-ed in the New York Post that says Trump needs to reverse the Iran deal. You say Obama regarded national security policy as a distraction during his presidency. What specific things does Trump need to do to assert our interest? Can he just walk in and reverse this deal? How tough would that be?
I don't think it would be tough at all. I think there would be considerable diplomatic implications. The Europeans were caught up in this deal, engaged in economic transactions with Iran. The Ayatollahs knew exactly what they were doing. They were trying to enmesh the Europeans in that kind of relationship to make the deal irreversible. But let's be clear what America's interest is. This deal was a strategic debacle. Not only is it bad for the United States in the big picture, the terms of the deal are bad. You can't hold them to the terms of a deal that are as amorphous and unclear and subject to multiple interpretations as this deal is. I think the only thing that we can do to try and get back on the right track is to say the deal's over. I am confident Iran was violating it before the ink was dry. They're doing it still today. And, you know, unless you're content to have Iran on an unimpeded path to deliverable nuclear weapons, this deal has to be scrapped.
But do you think that's going to incite a response from them, a violent response in some way? They're not going to be happy, obviously. So do you worry about, you know, a rebuke?
Well, point one, the Iranians are not going to be happy. You better believe they're not going to be happy because the best deal imaginable that they got is going to disappear. Will they change their behavior? Look at their behavior in the period from the agreement in the deal in Vienna in the summer of 2015 to today. It has gotten worse internationally. They've taken American hostages. They've armed the Houthi rebels in Yemen who have fired missiles at American warships in the Red Sea. They have attacked the United States for not fulfilling the deal when John Kerry has been described by Speaker of the House Paul Ryan as acting as though he's the president of the Tehran Chamber of Commerce. Their behavior has gotten more objectionable since they got the deal. I think that should tell you something.
Yeah, you're right. Rachel.
So, Ambassador, it sounds like Trump wants to strengthen NATO. At least that's what you said. But is it time to restructure our defense relationship with Europe, or is that just too disruptive?
Well, I think it's time for Europe to decide that they're going to live up to their commitments. This is a point that Trump has made. The criticism that he received for it, like, for example, from former Secretary of Defense Bob Gates, was he said, look, nobody was second to me in urging the Europeans to spend more on defense. Okay, great. Let's take that as true. He failed. The Europeans, many of them, did not spend more on defense. So having a candid conversation among allies about what it's going to take to stand up to what? To stand up to the potential of Russian aggression in Eastern and Central Europe, as we see today in Ukraine. What Russia has done twice in the past 10 years is something we said we would never allow on the continent of Europe again after 1945. They have used military force to change international boundaries. That is unacceptable.
No, you're right. But, I mean, is Donald Trump going to be tough with Russia in that regard?
Well, I suppose it depends in part on how the Europeans respond. I think Britain's decision, for example, to leave the European Union will help us strengthen the NATO alliance, because I think we will now have a closer relationship with the British, and we'll sort the Europeans out. I think sometimes when you're following a diplomatic tack of trying to persuade the Europeans to spend more money and you're not getting along, sometimes shaking the box a little bit can achieve different results.
Yep.